people may think that being a winner doesn't have its problems, right? That being at the top doesn't have any repercussions at all. But it actually does, because it gives you a point of being kind of relaxed, of no self-reflection. And since you're at the top, you have no one else to emulate, right? You have no one else to get that shortcut in order to get better. And you have to scrutinize yourself to the smallest detail in order to get that little bit extra better, versus looking at another team, seeing their play style, and then basically emulating that, right? Copying that, and that's your shortcut in order to get better. So being as a top team, you don't develop these new strats because you're currently winning, right? Why would you need to change your whole setup if you're stomping everyone else? And I'm creating this video largely because of Fnatic's situation currently, and that I think this is a part of their problem. And basically, as a top tier team, you need to discover new strats to stay ahead of the curve, because you're basically competing with your past self, right? There's no one else to compete with other than yourself, because you are the best. So you have to really self-reflect and see exactly what are your flaws within your current strategy, and then develop new strategies upon that. And not being used to losing, it's a skill to building yourself back up, right? Realizing that you're basically a piece of shit in specific areas of whatever it is you're doing, whether this be acting, whether it be video games, whatever, doesn't matter. And then building yourself back up, realizing those flaws, and realizing how to correct those flaws, right? And to give you some examples, CLG, for instance, with their famous split push strategy, right? And they have been reliant upon this strategy time and time again. And they had previously refused to even do anything but split push strategy. And they have worked on that this season, but you realize instances of where they go back to this strategy because they're faced with a very difficult challenge. They're faced with a very difficult team that's going to take their all in order to beat this team. So they just revert back to this strategy. And then you have a team like AHQ with Westdoor specifically, and how he's famously, well, now he's famous for having a small champion pool, and his laning issues, which have been extremely exacerbated through the World's Group Stage 2017 currently. And he wasn't really challenged in his home region because there's not a lot of talent there. It's just Flash Wolves and AHQ, and that's really it. And I guess Hong Kong attitude right now, but historically it's just been these two teams fighting each other and them stomping everyone else. So he doesn't have the, I guess, forefront of thought in order to realize, like, hey, this is really a problem. Maybe I should fix this. And then there comes to Fnatic, right? And how Fnatic have basically dumped all their resources into Reckless as he splits, onto side lanes, gets all the farm, and then they end up team fighting, and they basically put all the eggs into the Reckless basket and let him carry the game, right? And that's not undeservedly either, because he is a world-class ADC, so you can expect him to be able to do these types of things. But then they had this big breakdown with Reckless in the middle of the season, right? And Rift Rivals. And I mean, this isn't to downplay the issues that he stated with his mental problems. I'm not a fucking psychologist, so I'm not going to comment on any of that. That's a completely separate issue. But you have those problems to where they were basically playing one style, and his team just came out after Rift Rivals and said that, hey, you need to change the way that you're playing. You need to start playing meta champions because, I mean, let's face it, we're professionals, right? That's what professionals do. They play meta because it is the best statistical way to win the game most of the time, right? It's playing the OP champions because they're OP. And then you have Soaz, right, being irritated on social media recently, and with Jez's also pointing signs to the team's internal problems. And so you have these two great players of Soaz and Reckless and how they're used to being on the top, right? And when they're suddenly not at the top and they're suddenly faced with these challenges, it becomes very difficult to self-analyze and to have those skills to self-analyze because they aren't tested that much domestically, except, I mean, when they collapsed against Misfits in the semifinals. But it's when these top players finally meet a challenge, when these top teams finally meet a challenge, then they go back to this kind of primitive style that they've always been doing because they're afraid to try new things against this very tough opponent, and they're read like a book, right? And you go back to Fnatic with Reignover and Huni, right, and how they dominated domestically. Even with Immortals, they dominated domestically as well. And then you look at their current state, right? Reignover, he had trouble with his champion pool in spring, where basically the jungler was the carry and they played carry champions, but Reignover has historically played a control style jungle, right? And this was perfectly matched with Huni, you know, his top lane like duo. And you have Huni, who plays a sort of, I guess, a reckless with abandonment style, right? And he plays super far up into the lane. He plays super hyper aggressive, and he suddenly gets punished in LCK, which is the best region in the world, right? Of course he's going to get punished against these other really good top laners, against these other really good teams that realize exactly what this person is doing, and their top laners have enough mechanical prowess in order to withstand Huni for momentarily in order to expose him with a jungle gank or something. And so you have these players that have this really big flaw, yet they don't seem to try to improve it. And I mean, speaking of SKT, they are great at learning from losses, right? This is one of the best teams in the world, if not the best team in the world. And they've only been the best time and time again because they are so good at looking at their flaws and realizing exactly what is holding them back, right? Faker with his champion pool problems, and then EasyHoon stepping in because of his lack of control mage mastery, right? So Faker started to work on his control mages for that meta. And then you had Bengi's problems with the meta, and then Blank being subbed in, and then Bengi being subbed in Worlds, right? And I mean, I still think Bengi still had problems, but and then SKT this year in summer, they fought their way through LCK bracket, and during that time, you know, they realized their flaws. They realized, you know, that Huni was playing very aggressively, and to temper that aggression, and for Untara to play this kind of solid rock in the top lane, and for Peanut to also try and temper his aggression as well. And so you have these winners, right? And this is the whole point, that these winners have problems because they keep on winning, right? They're so used to winning. They're so used to not being so self-critical and so self-deprecating that they don't realize their own flaws. And so when they get to something like an international competition where all the best teams are there, they start to have problems, especially those outside of the LCK region, right? Because they're not, like, those are the best teams, right? So, I mean, you do have the best competition. But these other regions, they have this problem of winning domestically and being satisfied with their wins, being satisfied with their own play style, and then not learning to grow themselves afterwards. And I think this is currently what's happening with Fnatic in Worlds group stage.